Today I'm joined by Michael Heiken. Michael graduated from UC Berkeley at just the age of 19 with a degree in electrical engineering and computer science. During that time, he interned at NASA as well as Citadel, where he now works as a full-time software engineer. And today, I just thought we'd chat a bit about his story, and hopefully he can give some good advice that'll be helpful to all of you. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess to start out, just wanted to hear a little bit more about your story. So how exactly did you get here? How does one graduate from Berkeley at 19? Like what even happened to do that?
Yeah, so I'll start from middle school. I went to a really unorthodox middle school. It was 4 days a week, 4 hours a day, and we only studied two subjects, math and English. So I ended up getting super ahead on math during 8th grade, where I finished pre-calculus. And then during that time, I was also competing in robotics really heavily. And my team and I tied for first place in the world in VEX. And so after that, I kind of knew that, the typical high school route wasn't really going to be for me. I wanted to explore math further at a faster rate. So I actually went straight to community college right after middle school. And then I did that for about 2.5 years. And then I had some work in between there. And then ended up transferring to Berkeley with all my credits from community college, and then only doing 3 semesters at Berkeley after that.
Interesting. Well, it's interesting you mentioned VEX. You said you actually won Worlds?
Tied for first, technically second, but yeah.
Tied for first, technically second. Okay, so I've mentioned this on YouTube before, but my one of my introductions to programming was also VEX, and we went to the Worlds in Anaheim and forever ago. I think I was in like 8th grade at the time. Yeah, it's cool. So I guess that sounds intense. First of all, did you always find that you were just like super motivated? Did you enjoy math a lot, or was it just something you were sort of good at and parents were like, he's pretty smart, let's see what we can skip?
Yeah, so I think it was actually something I was really bad at. So I think something not a lot of people know about me is I actually repeated 4th grade because I was so behind in math. So it was really just kind of, my parents realized I was behind. They put me in this new school for like middle school. And like when you only study math and English, you tend to get pretty good at it because you're not boggled down with like art or, geography or literally anything else. So I think it was just purely a function of time. And then once I started getting better, I started liking it more. And that was kind of like a cycle, that continued. And that's what made me want to explore it more.
Gotcha. And do you think being like essentially, well, one, skipping all the other subjects, and 2, just like being so young, both during all 3 semesters you were in college and now as a software engineer, do you think that was an issue at all? Or do you think it was just ultimately, in your case, a good thing?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of interesting because I talk about breadth first versus depth first a lot with my friends. And I was definitely someone who took the depth first route where I basically only know math and computer science. If you ask me to point to where a state is on the map, like I cannot tell you where it is. So I definitely know that I'm like lacking in certain areas. I think I've just come to the conclusion that like for the types of jobs that I want to work, for the type of work I want to do, I'm just not going to need that other information. I'm not saying it's not important. And I know there's people who study it and like I value that a lot. It's just not something for me. And that's really what it's come down to. And then in terms of the age thing, honestly, it was never really that bad because like while I was younger in terms of my class, like for example, I was a 17-year-old junior in Berkeley, it didn't really matter because like there's tons of 17-year-old freshmen or 18-year-old freshmen. And many of my friends were still my age. They're just in school for like a few more semesters.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. So one question I get a lot is sort of related to what you just said. Of a lot of my viewers tend to be like in high school, or maybe they're just starting out college, and it does sort of feel like a lot of the classes you're taking are sort of a waste of time. And I get a lot of questions from people like, should I try this other route, whether it be skipping college altogether and going to a coding boot camp, or skipping high school to go to community college or some kind of program similar to that. Do you think for most of those people, it's something that's worth it? Or like, how do you evaluate, is it a good idea for me to go on this sort of accelerated path versus just going the standard path like I did of, I went to middle school, high school, I graduated high school at 18, I went to college for 4 years and got a job?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I think it comes down to, do you know what you want to do? And like, are you willing to take the risk that that knowledge is going to stay constant for the next few years. And for me, I was willing to take that risk. I've like been programming and doing computer science for a while. So it was a decision that coming up to high school, I'd already committed so many hours into robotics and programming that was just like, it really doesn't make sense for me to try anything else. Like I should just double down on this skill that I have. And if I do want to explore things, then I always have this really strong fallback. That's kind of always how I viewed it and how like my parents taught me to view it. In terms of like what I recommend for other people, I think it's really the same thing, right? If you're someone who's decided like, look, the arts are not for me, or like I don't really like anything within the humanities realm. I know I really want to do computer science or math, and I know that I have a passion for that, and I'm willing to do that, professionally past college. Then I think it makes a lot of sense to take an unorthodox path, because like not everyone should take the same path. It one size fits all is generally never the solution, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I'd mostly agree with that. One thing I would maybe add on to that is, while one size fits all is usually not the best thing, sometimes some of these questions I get have very specific paths, and it's like, I don't know that that path is going to work.
Yeah.
So one thing I would also caution people to do is make sure that there's some example of it working for somebody. Like, you don't need to be the absolute first person to have ever tried this thing. Like, for example, I've seen a lot of people who talk about going to a coding boot camp straight out of high school, and that maybe can work, right? Like maybe there are people getting a job that way, but there's frankly not a lot of them. So I just also caution people to be sort of careful with it. And for instance, if you're going to go to a coding boot camp out of high school, talk to that coding boot camp and say, hey, do you have any alumni I can talk to who did something similar and succeeded, to make sure that those people exist and you're not literally the first person in like completely uncharted territory.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I did not actually know anyone who did this path. And it was always like my parents and I kind of joke and we say, like, looking back, only now is it a success story, but it could have very easily not been, and then, life would have turned out very differently. So definitely agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So another question for you. So in my case, I graduated at like the perfect time in the market. So I graduated college in 2020. It was like the Oprah meme, like you get a job, you get a job, you get a job. Like they're just everywhere. It was easy. Everybody in my graduating class, granted, I went to a good school, but pretty much everyone in my graduating class left with a job offer in hand. You, on the other hand, you graduated, was it mid 2023? Is that accurate?
December 2023. Yeah,
or
but
end of
about the same.
2023. Yeah. So pretty much the worst time you could have graduated with a computer science degree in probably the last 5 to 10 years. So what is it that you did to find a job? And also, like, for all the students right now who are graduating now or in the next few years, what are the things you think they should be doing to sort of optimize to be one of those ones who do have that job early out of college?
Yeah. So I think I'll backpedal a little bit. I would say, like, if you're in junior year of college, or possibly like freshman or sophomore, I think from what I've seen, the number one thing you can do for yourself is get an internship your junior year, like your summer of your junior year before you start senior year. And the reason that is because if you can land that return offer, that's going to be like, to me, it's going to be a way higher chance that you can actually get a full-time job offer after college. Because otherwise you have to play the game of potentially getting resume rejected, potentially losing out to an OA because you were 1 minute too slow for something. And so if you already made it past that round, and if you already made it past all of that like legwork to get that internship, you just grind for that one summer and just guarantee yourself that spot back. It takes a lot of stress off of re-recruiting for new grad positions past that point. If you're someone who's already graduated, obviously, like, you can't do internships once you're not in school, at least not that I've heard of. So I think for that, I mean, the main thing you can do is just like, don't stop applying. Like, I recently made a video about my friend who applied to a company, got rejected, applied with a different email, and then got to the final round. And so it's like, if you really want a job, just like, don't stop applying, don't stop grinding,
Yeah. It's funny you say that. So when I worked at Facebook, I went through the internship route as well. And honestly, I don't know that I ever would have gotten that job had I not gotten the internship. Like, the internship interviews are just objectively easier. But I also was similar to what you just said I applied I was a sophomore in college when I did my first internship at Facebook, and I applied they have like a program for freshmen and sophomores. I applied to that. I got rejected from it, just like online automatically. Then I applied online for the normal internship. I got rejected from that too. And then I went to the career fair and I applied in person with a resume, talked to the recruiter, and he gave me an interview, and that's when I actually got the job. So I essentially got rejected by Facebook twice in 1 year, and then got hired the exact same year.
Yeah,
And
I think that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the only reason I even talked to them at that career fair is because I think they were giving away like T-shirts or something, and I was like, "Oh, I'll get the shirt." Like I've already been rejected, but I'll hand in my resume for the T-shirt. And then I had an interview like a week later.
Yeah, and I think that that definitely goes to the point of like it's so easy to apply, especially nowadays, right? There's things like Simplify. There's tons of job board websites where you can spam apply, just give your resume, and they'll aggregate a bunch of listings. And I think because of that, now it's getting harder and harder to get past that OA screen. So I think a like really valuable thing you mentioned is, yeah, you got rejected online, and then you went in person, and you went and talked to them, and you made that human connection. Maybe that made the difference, and ultimately, clearly, it did. So yeah.
Yeah. Do you think I've always kind of gone back and forth on this? The advice I used to give, and this is sort of what I personally did, was sort of the fire hose approach of just like apply everywhere. Like I applied to at least 100 internships my sophomore year. Once I had the Facebook one, I applied to only like 10 because it's like, I have this, I'm just going to apply to places I really want to work. But I applied to literally over 100, got rejected from almost all of them. And the way I always thought about it was like, okay, if you apply to one job, your odds of getting that job super low. If you apply to literally a million, your odds that you get at least one of those million is effectively 100%. And obviously you have to be somewhere in between those numbers. But
Yeah.
essentially, if you play the numbers game, eventually you'll get one of them. Do you think that's a good approach? Or do you think at this point it's better to really focus in a little bit more on some of them, try to find ways to not just be applying online and to reach out to actual humans, whether it be for referrals or reaching out to recruiters, or like, what do you think is like the best approach now?
I feel like something in between where you do kind of this mass apply just because you kind of have to. It's like when a lot of people apply to colleges, right? They apply to a bunch of backup schools. And so I think that's still totally fine to do. And then for the schools that you really care about, in this case, like the jobs or internships that you care about a lot, just focus in on, go to the career fairs that you think that company is going to go to, reach out to recruiters there, reach out to potential alumni, really put in the extra legwork if you truly want to work at that company, because that'll shine through. And still have your backup, still apply to, all of those places. Because I know for myself, like my first semester at Berkeley, I actually didn't apply to a lot of places. And like looking back, I regret that just because I realized that like there's a somewhat of a luck element to this. And I could have just straight up been unlucky. And I, again, could have been in a very different place right now. So
yeah, absolutely. There's a huge luck element to it. I always say like, luck is one of those things where like you can put yourself in a position to be quote unquote lucky by sort of putting yourself out there and like doing the work, but there's always some just random aspect to it.
Yeah.
Like had the Facebook recruiter I talked to on that day been having a bad day or just didn't like my personality, maybe there were two recruiters there, and had I been in the line on the other side and talked to the other one, I wouldn't have gotten the interview. I wouldn't have had an internship that year because I was literally the only offer I had that year. And my life would be very, very different had I not had that one Facebook internship. So yeah, there's definitely some level of luck to it. On the actual side of like passing the OAs, which for anyone wondering, that's the online assessments. So for passing those and passing the coding interviews, did you do anything special to prepare for the coding interviews, or did you just do the classic grind on LeetCoder, Algo Expert, or whatever website?
Yeah, so honestly, I didn't really do the grind like at the time when I was applying. When I was like younger, I think around like 14 or 15, I was just on LeetCode for a summer just for fun. And like I like it sounds kind of weird, I guess, but it just became kind of like a yeah, for sure. It kind of just became like a habit / hobby where I was just doing LeetCode. And then by the time it came around to me actually applying for internships, I only had to do, a handful of problems to kind of reignite that flame that was in my head already from all the practice I'd put in when I was younger. But if I hadn't done that, I definitely would have been on the grind just like everybody else. I think because I started earlier, I just had way more time. So it was less of a sprint, more of a marathon kind of thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting to say that. And I think it's actually good advice for people, even if you are trying to apply for jobs like the next 6 months, that you don't need to do the grind thing of I'm going to do 500 questions. I've made a lot of videos about this in the past. I think that's just a horrible approach. Like if you learn fundamentals really well, like in my case, I maybe did like 50 questions or something like that. But I also took, I think, 3 different classes in college that were some form of data structures or algorithms. to where I had a very good fundamental understanding. And then the practice was just like practicing the process and practicing sort of the pattern matching of, oh, I need to apply this algorithm to this type of problem. And I
Yeah.
think that's a skill you can build much quicker if you're very like focused on how you go about building the skill instead of just like, I'm going to do as many questions as possible and just grind.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think like a really common theme that basically any person who makes like CS videos online gets is like, it's always the same question: how many leak code problems do I have to do? And like, I can't stress enough that it's not a number. And if it was a number, my number is not your number. In terms of everybody has, I've seen this, like I've had friends who have never touched leak code before. And if you throw like 10 leak code hards at them, they'll solve 8 of them immediately. And it's like, it's not a function of how many leak code problems they've done. Just some people have a generally higher aptitude for certain types of problems or thinking in a certain type of way. So you can't just like find some random threshold from some random person on YouTube and decide that like, oh, this is the number I need and then I'll be ready. So
yeah, absolutely agree. All right, so one last question for you. For somebody who maybe is a little bit earlier on, so they're not at that leak code grind yet, but they're just trying to sort of figure out if this is something that's right for them. Maybe they're a high school student or in college exploring different majors and things. What advice would you have for those types of people?
yeah, so I think a big thing is like you should figure out if the major and generally if software development is for you. I think the best way to do that is honestly just picking up personal projects. And I know there's definitely, tons of online topics about like how to pick a personal project, which ones are the best. And, you always get the same like simple recommendations of like building a calculator, building, all these simple apps. But I think the best personal projects come out of need. So like, for example, for me, a lot of personal projects I ended up doing were things like I identified some problem and I decided, oh, maybe I can automate this somehow. And actually, that's a really big niche that like I fell in love with, was automating random tasks that I thought that like humans were really inefficient at. And like, that's just something weird that I fell in love with. And then that like, kind of carried my passion through CS. So I feel like, the big theme is just spend as much time as possible identifying what it is you want to do with computer science, or find some intersection of what your interests are with computer science, and then start learning toward that as your goal.
Yeah, I love that. I see the question a lot of like, what programming language should I learn? Questions like that. And it's like, I don't know. What are you trying to do? Right? Like, what is the thing that you actually want to do? And I don't think the goal necessarily should be, I want to learn how to code, or I want to get this job or something. It should be, I want to do this thing. And if that thing you're doing becomes really interesting to you and it turns into a job, like that's amazing. And you should follow that path through a computer science degree or whatever it might be. But yeah, I would totally agree that just like exploring things that are just naturally interesting to you, I think is oftentimes sort of the best route to find the thing that you're going to be most interested in, whether it's computer science and software engineering or something completely different. Yeah. So one final question for you, I guess. Is there anything that you want to shout out? I know you have a TikTok, any other socials?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, if you guys like the content, follow me at Michael Hyken on Instagram and TikTok.
Awesome. And I'll link that at the top of the description as well. So yeah, thank you so much, Michael, for coming on, and everyone go give him a follow as well.